Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Global Mapper webinar. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode, and at this time, you should be able to see Global Mapper version 13.2 on your screen. If you need assistance or have connectivity issues during the presentation, please send an email to feedback@bluemarblegeo.com. Our support team will reply to you promptly. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can use the questions tool at the right of the GoToWebinar screen to submit questions to our panelists. Our panelists will field some of them as we go and address more at the end of the presentation. We'll address as many questions as we can during the session, and we'll follow up via email on any remaining questions. You can always email our support team at gmsupport@bluemarblegeo.com. Today's demonstration will be about 45 minutes in duration. Welcome, everyone. Today's session will cover the data creation and editing capabilities of the Digitizer tool in Global Mapper for creating new map layers or modifying existing ones. Global Mapper's Digitizer has a number of capabilities, from simple point, line, or polygon drawing to entry by coordinate geometry, or COGO, and a number of tools like buffering, range rings, and even 3D terrain modification. Sam will start off with the basics for new users and go all the way through some of the advanced features for powerful spatial data editing. As always, our sales and training team is on the road. This month we'll head out to San Diego for the ESRI Users Conference, and we'll be hosting our annual Blue Marble Users Group Luncheon. We encourage you to stop by, share your thoughts, and have lunch on us. We'll then head down to Melbourne, Australia, and where we will be attending the 22nd Congress of the ISPRS. We do still have training spots available for those two classes if anyone is interested. On-site custom training sessions are also available, and you can always find out more by contacting your Blue Marble sales rep at training@bluemarblegeo.com or right directly on our website. And at this time, I would like to introduce Sam Knight, Director of Product Management.
Thank you, Danielle. Good morning, everyone. So as Danielle mentioned, today we're going to be working with the Digitizer tools. Specifically, that's the big long toolbar on the second row of the interface. And those are all going to be enabled by simply turning on that Digitizer tool with the little pencil icon with the line coming off of it. So today's topic is data creation, data editing, modifying existing points, lines, or areas. Some of the introductory things that we can do, just like simply drawing a new line on the map, all the way up to working with existing data layers. So I've started off here. We have an existing workspace that I've loaded in. And this is basically just a sample of some basic types of data. So you'll see the very bright, colorful terrain model around in the background. We have our raster map catalog. This is a small collection of 1 meter tiled raster orthophotos. And on top of that, I have a layer of points, a layer of lines, and a layer of area features. So specifically, our area features are the red lines. Here you see these are actually town boundaries. The orange road network is superimposed on top of that. And then you'll see a couple of little black points in here as well. And those represent public boat launches for this example. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start on the Digitizer toolbar, and we're essentially going to work from left to right across that toolbar. We're going to go over all the basic features and functions. We're going to start off with just simple stuff like drawing a new line on the map, and we're going to sort of end up with some of the more complicated topics, things like tracing a break line area onto the map and using that to modify the 3D terrain model that we have underneath. So we're going to start off with the basics and end up with the complicated stuff at the end, but today is basically going to be all things Digitizer. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just zoom in so we have a little focused area to work on where we can actually interact with some of those existing layers. And now the Digitizer tool, like I mentioned, it is represented by the little pencil icon up there on the toolbar. We can also get there under the Tools menu. You can simply select Digitizer under there, or a lot of folks also use the hotkey of Alt-D to turn that on. There are a number of keyboard shortcuts for use with the Digitizer. I'm not really going to get into those today because they do all the same things that some of our graphic, the buttons do, but there is a list under the Help menu to access the shortcut key list. This will take you to a PDF sheet that we have on our website. It has all sorts of helpful shortcuts that you can use to speed up your digitizing operations, whether you're editing or actually authoring new map layers. So to get right to it here, I'm simply going to toggle on my Digitizer, and you'll see that actually lights up a good portion of the toolbar. So from left to right, we have typically here the simple stuff is more towards the left, and we get into more of the complicated stuff as we stray across that toolbar to the right direction. We're going to start off with the first chunk of the toolbar, sort of everything from this one on the extreme left. That's our Create New Area feature. We have Create Rectangular Square Areas, or rectangles specifically rather than more complicated polygons. A couple of modes of drawing lines, specifically some rectangular square line drawing tools and COGO tools, so coordinate geometry, defining lines based on their angular relationships between the different segments. So those first 6 tools there are really our basic line drawing tools, and we're going to take a look at those first. Specifically, we're going to be working with some of these different layers that we have in here. As I'm creating new lines, new areas, new points, we're going to see a new layer pop into the Overlay Control Center. So this is where we organize all of the different layers of map data that we have here. So here we can see the things like the terrain models that we have loaded in the background, those raster images, and then the point, line, and area features, each in their own layer, and you can see those are each represented by the different geometry style buttons that we have in there. So we're going to see a new category show up in there as we start drawing a whole bunch of features. We're going to be adding in what's called the user-created features layer. And so we'll come back to that in just a bit. So let's get right to it here. I'll simply start off by drawing a new area feature on the interface. So we click the Draw Area Feature tool, and you'll notice that the cursor, you see my cursor moving around in there. Now the cursor is going to change slightly for each one of these tools. It's going to basically toggle on to the crosshairs. You'll also see, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to see. I'm going to put it up here. Let's see here, where can I put this? Something that's a nice light background. I'm looking for a piece of my map. If you notice, maybe on the field there, if you notice, it's got a little black dot in the center of those crosshairs. The little black dot does a special thing for us as we move around and approach other map data. What that little black dot does for us is tells us where we're actually going to be snapping to. So rather than jolting the cursor away from where you have it on screen, as you approach an existing point, line, or polygon, the little black dot that represents the snapping location is going to zip off and touch the ends of some of these lines. So if you notice, as I get closer to this little orange line here, the black dot leaves the center of those crosshairs and snaps onto the end of that line. Snapping can simply be toggled on and off under the configuration menu, whether or not you want to use snapping. It is typically a very helpful thing when digitizing new features in there, because very often we do have some type of points or lines that are going to give us a good starting place. So if I happen to start digitizing with my mouse in its current position right now, it will actually begin at the point that I'm snapped to. If I pull away from that just a little bit, you'll see that black dot goes back into the center of the crosshairs, and my new area, if I click to begin, will start right from the point that I'm on. So I've just left-clicked with my mouse, dragging away from that. You'll see the first line start to light up. Whatever direction I go, you'll see the line connecting that. But my snapping tool is still active. You'll notice as I get closer to the end of that other line, it will jump over there. And we can snap that to any of these existing pieces of data, or we can move away again and have it return out to the center of the crosshairs. So it's a simple left click. I'll just simply left click again. And you'll notice that since we're creating an area feature, it will show us using that connected line, the black line going back to my start point, and the red highlighted area there with the slash fill, that's the closing mark of the polygon. So if I were to end my drawing by right-clicking with the mouse, it will close the polygon on that line and bring up my editing tools. So we're going to see this modify feature info tool a few times as we create some different pieces of data. But this is going to pop up whether we're creating points, lines, or polygons, area features. And it gives us an opportunity to work with the attributes, as well as what layer the specific thing is going to go into, as well as styling information all in one go here. So if I were creating this new area, I'm just going to call this area feature. I can fill in a name for that. That name will be used automatically as the label unless I have some other more complicated labeling scheme going on. What type of a feature that's going to be, we can simply classify that into a number of different types of areas, lines, or points. We have a number of styles representing each one of those. And so what we have to do basically is pick out the most appropriate layer if we want to classify those and use some of the automatic styling for those. So for this particular polygon, it's kind of out in the country. It might be something that we would classify as cropland if we just want to say, for example, that that's a local farm of some kind. As I select that particular feature type, you'll notice the styling changes for that automatically based on that classification. You do have the ability to create your own new types there, so you can create those custom styles. And what that does is basically drastically speeds up the creation of your data, since you can just automatically pick out those feature types, classify them based on whatever your need is, and have those automatic labeling and simply the feature styling attributes all get set for you right from the get-go, rather than having to go back in there and doing it later. The feature style can also be manually overridden. So you'll see there's the default option is to use the default style for whatever the classification is that you've set. So under that feature type, each of these different types have their own appearance style that goes with them. If, for example, you don't want to do that, if you want to maybe highlight a particular feature, you can simply toggle to use a selected style, and then you have full options for controlling that appearance. Everything from the transparency of those, if we wanted to maybe make one of those existing styles a little bit see-through, from everything down to the fill pattern, whether you want solid fill or any type of hatched fills on those. So if we do stuff like that, you'll see the feature style then re-render for you with some of those options. So what I've just done on this one is taken that default style, but then set it to a more transparent scheme. Down at the very bottom of the Modify Feature Info window, we have the feature attributes. Under the attributes, we have some automatically calculated things, such as perimeter and enclosed area. Those are automatically calculated for us as we create new areas. Things like length of line will be automatically calculated for us and filled in. And then we also do have the opportunity to add our own in there. We can do things like add elevations to areas, lines, or points. We can add any other attributes that we see fit, and then do all of the sort of typical analysis things with those, simply storing attributes, things like maybe inventories of particular assets, any of the defining characteristics, all the usual stuff that we do with attribute information. So I'll come back to the attributes in a little bit as we start actually modifying some of the terrain. We'll be adding some elevations and things such as that. So I'll say OK. That finalizes our feature, and you'll see our new shaded area then appears on the map. We're still toggled on with our Draw Area feature tool, and so you'll notice those snapping tools still are active as I stay around the edge of that feature. What I can do is simply attach another area feature to this automatically if I like. I can start drawing another feature, and you'll see that snaps right onto those existing borders. Again, goes right back into the Modify Feature area. I'll just call this one Area 2. And all the same types of controls are found for those. Here, it's going to be using that default type. If we say OK, it comes in with that solid, non-transparent type. So again, we can go back in and modify any of those attributes of the styling as we see fit. but we can do it right up front, nice and simple. So that's not a very complicated tool. Associated with that is the rectangular area tool. This allows us to draw rectangles and squares. The first tool we used, you can see I used it to draw an irregular polygon. The rectangle tool is much simpler. You simply click to start drawing and drag away a rectangular area. It will snap us into that aspect. So 90-degree corners, it's going to be an orthogonal rectangle against the background. So again, another fairly simple tool there. As we get into polylines, we have a couple of different modes that we can draw our lines with. We have creating a new line feature with what we call vertex mode, and this is our typical line drawing tool where we simply click to begin drawing a particular line. We drag away from that. You'll see typically it stays attached wherever we want to go at any orientation. I left click again to place my next vertex, and then stretches away just as it did before. I right click to end that. We come back to our modify feature info dialog as we normally do, and we say okay. So I have a nice long segments of straight lines interconnected. That's one mode of drawing our lines. Our second mode is with what we call trace mode. And this is much more like a freehand pencil drawing. We're not placing individual vertexes. Those are done automatically for us as we simply click and hold the left mouse button. So here I'm going to left click, holding down my mouse button. As I move away from that, you'll see it traces exactly where my cursor is going. So I can trace all kinds of very complicated and smooth lines. That's particularly good for tracing shoreline boundaries if you're going to be doing just a quick heads-up digitization, something a little more irregular than, say, a road line where you have an obvious long series of straight lines to apply vertexes to. And those are created just as our areas were. They get added into, by default, that automatically created user-created features. So we'll see the feature count in there, the 5 features. I've just drawn a few of those areas and a couple polylines now. That is one of the options we have when creating these. We can actually move these between the various layers that we're in. If we want to be, instead of creating our own lines on top of this, we can actually add them into other layers as well. If we want to take a look at doing that, what we'll do here is we'll zoom into a particular area on screen. I'm just going to zoom in down to the area where we have a road that needs to be extended out to the new end of a road there. What we can do, we'll turn that digitizer back on. I'm going to select my line drawing tool in vertex mode because I do have some rather nice straight lines working on here. I'll approach the end of that road. You'll see my snap tool light up as it brings me on the end of that road. So we're going to trace down to the ends. I'll click twice. I'm just going to put 2 extra vertexes in this as this road is extended out to finish off in this cul-de-sac. Right-click to end. And one of the choices we have in here as well, we took a look at feature type and the feature styling, but there's that one last drop-down we haven't used yet called feature layer. And so what this allows us to do is pick from any of the appropriate vector layers. You'll notice that I don't have the terrain layer or the raster layer. It doesn't make sense to add those into those types. But what we can do is enter those as new elements of, say, the roads network in this case. So if I add that to my main roads layer, and we take a look at our control center, you'll see we're still at those 5 features in our user-created features because I've actually just added that into my base layer. So that's how we're going to be doing things like adding new features to those existing data. If we were going to be modifying, maybe subdividing a new parcel on a parcel-based map or something like that, we would want to directly add that into our existing data rather than just dumping it on top of the user-created layer. Just going to pop back out a bit to our main view here and take a look at some of these other tools. All right, so we have, in addition to creating our regular lines via vertex mode or trace mode, we also have what we call a rectangular or square line. As we click to draw our rectangular lines, this is basically to draw a rectangular area, except instead of actually creating a closed polygon type element, this is simply going to create a shape that has the same start and end point that is a line feature. So this can be useful sometimes if you don't want to have a solid infill, if you just want to simply trace a boundary path around something. So that's what that box tool is for. It's also very commonly used simply to create some areas of interest if you want to basically box something in to highlight it on the map as a drawing tool. So those are our three main ways of creating lines. We have one more that's a little bit more technical. It's a little bit more on the surveyor end of things, and that's our COGO tool. The COGO tool, again, COGO stands for Coordinate Geometry. That's a pretty common acronym for those of you who may not be familiar with it. But coordinate geometry basically is talking about the geometric relationship of each of the vertexes along a line. And so what we do with that is we have to begin from a starting point. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to zoom in to a little particular place where we have some open area that we can look at in some fields here. And turn my digitizer back on. I'm going to click onto that COGO tool, and you'll see what we're asked for is a point. So this point is going to become, in surveyor speak, that might be what we would call our point of beginning. So we're going to start at that point, and I'm simply going to left-click the mouse, and you'll see a dialog pop up for us on screen. I'm just going to move that over to the right so we can see the line actually getting drawn in here. And what this is asking us for, there's a number of different types of entry. The main type of entry is this one at the top here, where we're going to be specifying a distance and a bearing away from that start point to define our line. So what I'll do here is I'm going to say let's walk away from that line at a distance of 100 meters. And now our bearing is basically our compass bearing. So if we're going to be taking a compass reading of 0 degrees to north, 90 east, we're going to be increasing clockwise 360 degrees around from there. So if I wanted to simply start going north, let's say I'm going to walk 100 meters north at a bearing of 0 degrees. We go up to the Add Point button, and that's going to extend a line out from that point in the northerly direction. So that's going to be walking off north for us. We then are represented at the end of that line. We might say take that over to the northeast. If we take a heading of 45 degrees, we add our point. It's going to extend our line off and so on. We can keep on doing this as long as we like. You'll see all of the relative lists of points building up at the bottom, defining that line, and we can walk away from that point as long as we want. We're free to enter in different distances. If I want to maybe add up to 200 meters on that next segment, we want to head due east, we can add that point, and you'll see the line keep building from there. There are a few modes of entry in here. We have there's a mode in here called one-handed entry that you can use, and it basically uses a combination of typing your coordinates in, hitting enter down at the bottom. You automatically move between some of the fields. There are ways to load these in from a file. I'm not going to get into these because there's not really a lot to see on those, but there are a number of ways that you can interact with the COGO tool in particular. If you're interested in some of those, I would definitely check out the documentation on the COGO tool. And it's pretty simple on how to actually bring some of those things in. One of the things that folks are also particularly interested in here is the Set Start Position button down at the very bottom. So you can begin by simply clicking on a particular location, as we did. I just clicked on a random pixel on the map. But very often, your starting point is going to be a very particular location. And so we can set the start position for that line down to an exact coordinate location. That is, very often you're going to have that particular coordinate that you want to begin from in this type of operation. You can set that start point, and that will then affect the geometry of the rest of your line as well. When we complete the drawing of that line on the screen, we come back to the modify feature info to finish off the creation of that new line segment. So it's in the feature layer creation, it does remember the last layer that you added your feature into. So if you are going to be editing on a few layers, you want to make sure that you keep an eye on that setting as you move from feature to feature with your creation. So those are the 4-line drawing tools, and those are really the simplest ways to add data in here. We've also got our simple point tool. That's just as simple as clicking a point on the map and creating a new point. This is also how we create text features. If we create a point on the map and select a particular feature type to it, those are all going to have various symbols that are applied. If we're going to be creating just a text feature rather than a point, so if you just want to drop a label on the map, that's going to be done essentially by creating a point with no symbol attached to it. So you'll see there's a number of different symbols, and if we're going to be creating just a text feature, that's just simply going to be a point with no symbol. Our point drops in on the map, added into whatever layer we've selected, and again with any of the symbology that we've selected as well. So those are the main just basic drawing tools. From there we can start getting a little bit more complicated. We can add in things like range rings. And a range ring, for those of you maybe not familiar with that term, it's essentially a series of concentric circles spaced out by a distance. And what I'm going to do here is just zoom out a little bit so we can have a little more room to play with on the map. And I'll focus in on another area where we haven't really drawn anything yet. And if we click that range ring tool, we basically choose a center location wherever we're going to put that series of circles. We simply click on the map, and we have some various options. So the default is one single range ring at a radius of 1 kilometer. We're free to change that to whatever we like. Let's say I want to make 5 rings, and instead of kilometers, let's make my range rings 200 meters in radius. You also have access to change that center point if you want to enter in a particular coordinate rather than just simply clicking on the map. And there's a couple of other options in here to create a point at the center rather than just the outward rings. And as well, you've also got the option to create range rectangles, which will basically be rectangular boxes at the radius you've selected rather than circles. As we click OK, you'll see all of those rings appear on the map. One thing folks notice, in particular on the range rings, as you're getting out to very large areas, or if you're dealing with some fairly distorted projections, is the range rings are actually drawn in geodetic distances. So great circle distances away from that point. So if you are working in a projected map, what you're going to see are the actual true distances represented on the ground rather than distances in that projected space. What that will do is sometimes it will create slightly elliptical shaped circles rather than perfect circles. You'll have some sort of more oval shaped objects coming in for your range rings. And if you're working in an area of very heavy distortion on maybe a large world projection or something like that, you can see some actually quite funny lines show up on the map. But those are all based on the true geodetic distances as we create those. Similar to range rings, there's also a buffer tool. And the buffer tool is typically applied to some existing data. So I'm going to just sort of scoot over to the side a little bit here and interact with some of these other lines that we have, and we can apply a buffer operation to those. So what I'm going to do is I'm turning off the range ring tool, I'm leaving my digitizer on, and I'm just simply going to grab onto one of those existing roads. Now the buffer tool is a little bit farther over on the toolbar, and what this does is the same type of thing as the range ring. This is essentially going to allow us to create a series of buffer zones. We have some options starting off just with one single buffer zone at a fixed distance, or we can feed those distances in from an attribute. So what I'll do here is I'm just simply going to, let's make 3 just so we have something to look at. And I'm going to use a fixed distance. So let's say I'm going to make these out at 20 meters out from the center of my road line. Now the reason we might use the get distance from attribute field is if you're going to have an attribute field attached to something, say like a road layer, one of the very common pieces of data associated with something like a road is the inventory width of that road. So how wide is actually your pavement? Roads are very often drawn as center lines of the road. So if you have something like the center line and you have an inventory of the widths of the road, you can very quickly turn that into an area feature using the buffer tool to interact with at the actual correct width of that feature. We can choose to create a particular type of area. We can classify those buffers as we create them into all of those same basic area types that we saw under the classifications. And a couple other options in here to combine any overlapping buffered areas. Sometimes you may have buffers that overlap with other buffers. And as well, similar to the range rings, we can create rectangular buffers rather than just simply what will be the more complicated line buffers. So as we create those, you'll see my range rings are drawn, my buffers are drawn around those points. If we zoom in a little bit, we can get a little better idea of what those actually look like. So you'll see there is a series of area features that are drawn, all centered on our line in the middle. All of the blue dots are the nodes of each of those lines. If we clear that selection out, you'll see we have those concentric areas. So that's range rings and the buffer tool. As well, another very common tool that folks use to automatically create a lot of features at once is the tool to create a regular grid of features. This basically takes a starting point. So we simply click on the map to drop down our grid. You'll see there's a red line representing that grid on the map. We can specify a rotation angle. If we want to put that off at an angle, I'll just rotate this at 30 degrees just so we can see what that looks like. Otherwise, it would be simply an orthogonal grid. And what I'm going to do here is make a 5x5 grid on the ground. So I'm going to have 5 grid cells. I can apply a width to each of those. So let's make a width of, I'll go 50 meters here in my width. So I'm going to make some squares. I'll just make 50 meters by 50 meters. There's a couple of options down here for creating lines instead of areas if you just want to see a grid superimposed rather than solid areas on the ground. Whether you want to create points at the grid line endpoints, basically surrounding the box area that we're going to be drawing. And then some naming options. Since each of these grid cells is going to have an attribute assigning a name to it, we have some control over that as well. As we OK those options, you'll see our grid gets filled in. So I rotated this 30 degrees, so you see this kind of off-center grid. You see all the nodes defining each of those boxes in there. If we clear the selection, we'll see as well the labels that are assigned. So I simply took the default A1, B2, and so on labels in the grid. So that can be used for a number of things, either for things such as creating file links to data. If we're going to be doing some of the more complicated types of editing, we can select a particular feature in there. We can add file links that might pull up lists of other data that lives within those grid cells. We can do things like add in any of the associated information, all of our typical editing features in there. We could add attributes for, say, inventories that are done within those cells. They can be used for cropping other data sets and so on. So there's a number of reasons you might want to use the the regular grid creation tool. It's really going to be up to however it is you work with the application. We've also used it in association with some field research scientists who are just quickly looking at a way of sort of arbitrarily breaking up study areas into, say, 1 hectare grids along an area. So there's a number of things we can do that, but the output of that is simply a collection of adjacent individual area features. That's gotten us over to the strike and dip tool. Excuse me. The strike and dip point creation tool is something mainly used by geologists working with terrain maps. What this allows us to do is basically just simply click a point on the map. If we're going to be working with something like a topographic map, we click a point on the map, and we can drop in those strike and dip points. Basically, they're terrain indicators. You'll see the various symbols that can be used for those. These all mean very specific things to geologists. We're not going to really get into too many of these. But what we can do is pick the particular azimuth for either the strike or the dip relative to true north, magnetic north, or the map projection north, top of the screen, and create those as points on the map. You'll see as those are created, they add in the relevant symbols and the azimuth readings for either the strike or the dip. And again, those are all meaningful to geology types. That's what that tool is there for. For those of you not working in sort of the geology realms, that's probably not going to be a tool that means a whole lot to you. The next toggle on there is simply a toggle button to show or hide the line vertices. If we toggle that on, you'll see all of the vertices of all of the feature layers lights up. That can be useful for editing. We toggle that off, they all go away. That's pretty much what that does. Now you'll notice the rest of the buttons along the digitizer are all grayed out at this point. There are a number of tools in here that we can use to interact with specific selected features that are not so much creation tools. So what I'm going to do here is pan down. We're going to go back into town where we have some more data to play with. And we're going to use some of these various features out here. So with the digitizer, I can click on any of these particular road lines. You'll see I can either click on the road lines, or I can click on the area features. So you'll see it highlights the whole area. And as I click on those various features, you'll see that some of these various tools light up. Some of them are specific to polygons. Some of them are specific to the polyline features. But they all have very particular functions. Start right there with the Move Selected Features button. What that allows us to do is simply click and drag an entire feature and relocate the whole thing at once. I'm going to select a different little piece of that. What I'll do here is just select one of these individual little road features to take a look at that with. And if I grab onto the Move Selected Features button, what that allows me to do is simply click and drag that road off to an alternate location. So let's say that road doesn't actually live down where it was. It should be a little bit farther over. I can just grab the entire feature and drag it over and then edit it right in place. So that's one of those little features. There is specifically a Move Selected Vertices feature in there. And you'll notice, let me zoom in just a little bit farther here so we can see the particular features. You'll see those particular vertexes associated with the road here. And as I click on the line itself, you'll see the vertexes all light up, and one vertex in particular is highlighted. That's our selected vertex. So if I grab onto that selected vertex, I can then just move that one vertex and edit the individual pieces of a line in that sense. Another tool, I can insert a vertex on an existing line if my line is not complicated enough to follow a particular bend. With that tool, that allows us to simply snap a new vertex into a line. That's very often used then with the Move Selected Vertexes to actually get a little more fine control to do things like wrap around corners of a line. I'll just pop back out a little bit here and select some adjacent lines that we have on the map. So I have some lines here surrounding one particular city block on this map. So I've just selected 4 individual polylines. This is where we might get into the conversion between areas and lines. You'll see there's 2 features here side by side, the create lines from areas feature and the create areas from lines features. Those do just what they say. So I've selected a series of adjacent polylines that all connect. Those actually form the area of a box, even though they are independent lines. So what I can do is click that button to create areas from those. And there's a few options about those. We can require matching attributes and things like that. We can also require them to be fully closed if we want to create only areas that actually do have the line work touching. And when we do that, if we do select that they must be completely closed, you'll see those do have to complete all the way around. Otherwise, it will pop up an error such as that. So there must be a small little gap somewhere in those roads. But if I've inspected my data and I'm pretty sure that I actually do want to have those connecting, we can try that same tool, turn off the toggle to require that they're fully closed, and then that will automatically create an area feature for us from there. So for this particular block, that just happens to be called the half-horn block in this area. And if I wanted to turn that into an area to be represented on screen, I could simply select one of those layers to pop that into. I could simply create a new layer for that feature to land itself in, and then we can apply whatever type of feature classification we want to put on that. I'll just use City Park here for lack of a better description. What I might do on this instead, if I were really being serious about this, would be to create a new type in there. Because this particular block, I might want to highlight that as a historic district portion of town. And I might create my own feature type for that with its own appearance. As we add that in there, I created a new layer, so it was asking for a specific layer to put that in the control center. And so I just entered the quick name there of user with one feature. And back on the main screen, clear that out. You'll notice the half-horn block now shows up as its own area. So a bunch of those common features in there, things like the lines from areas, areas from lines, a number of other little tweaky features, such as the ability to break a line along a certain chunk. So you'll notice I've got my selected feature in there in the center. I can sever that line at that point. And then if I select, you'll see now I've just made 2 lines from one line. That can be useful for things such as altering have things like a road network where a road suddenly changes name partway through, or some sort of other classification changes, maybe where a road turns from pavement to dirt. Getting a little farther over there, we can create points from line vertices and area vertices as well. So we have that particular selected feature there. If I create points from those, that's also going to add in individual point features on that line. You'll notice it just dropped a little black point for me on the screen from that selected node. Getting a little farther over, we have the ability to rotate and scale features. If we want to basically modify the alignment of something that's like maybe, say, a template that we've put on screen, that's a very, very simple setting. We hit that, and it simply asks us for a rotation angle, scale factor if we need to, say, tweak something like an existing template. I'm just going to back out of that. Pretty straightforward. There is an option here to combine some selected areas. And to take a look at that, I'm actually going to zoom out a little bit. We'll get those features that we started off with here. So I have our two features that I've drawn in on the map. We have the ability to merge those into a single area, and there's some various combination options that we can pick from in there if we want to make sure that they have some sort of matching attribute to place those together. As we take a look at those, you'll notice it's become one single area. Conversely to that, we also have the ability to crop out from specific areas, so we can grab onto those, and we can simply use those to peel out any of the existing data that's underneath of those. So what we can do is use something like, say, a town boundary to automatically slice out any of those other layers that we've drawn in or that we've simply pulled out of existing data. So those are really all of our main drawing features in there. There's a couple of little specialty buttons at the end there for right angle draw mode and orthogonal draw mode. Some folks will occasionally get those toggled on and get a little confused as they're drawing lines. What those do for us is they lock us into particular orientations of the cursor. So what I'm going to do here is I'll toggle on my Create New Line feature in Vertex Mode tool. I will toggle on my right angle draw mode, and as I click to begin drawing, you'll see that first line will go anywhere that I like. My second line will only remain in 90-degree orientations to that other line. That gets very useful if you want to make sure you have a nice clean 90-degree bend on, say, a road or a boundary where you want to lock that into that particular orientation. Not quite COGO, but almost in there. If we toggle that off, you'll see the line then goes off in any orientation. And we can finish off drawing our features such as that. The orthogonal draw mode is a little more specific than that. That actually locks us into north, south, east, west from each of our lines. So all you control is the length and the 90-degree direction away from that point. As we click, you'll see you're then also locked into the 90-degree orientation any away from there, north, south, east, west. And again, if we toggle that off, it loosens up and you gain that freedom. One last thing we're going to get into here is the really sort of the more advanced feature of actually using some of these areas that we've digitized in to modify our terrain layers. So what I'm going to do here real quick is we're going to move over to our square area that we drew in. Select that. We can edit that area feature, and we can apply an elevation to it. As we add a new attribute, elevation comes up for me here because that was also the last attribute I edited in there. And if I add in, I'll say add in an elevation for this, and I'm gonna bump this up. Let's say that square exists at how about 100 meters above the terrain there. We add in the elevation, and that applies the elevation to that area within the terrain model. So if you remember, we do have that terrain model in the background. One of our layers are those terrains in the background. As we move from our 2D mode here, if I go into 3D mode, we can apply that elevation to the square that I've drawn on screen here. So you'll see that box now extrudes up from the surface in there. This can be used to do things like simulate building pads, if you're going to be leveling off the area to build a foundation or a tower construction pad, or if you actually want to simulate placing a building into that model to act as an obstacle for things like line of sight or view sheds or modifying watershed delineation. So we have our box here now, and that's a three-dimensional vector feature. And we can actually use that three-dimensional feature that we've drawn in with the Digitizer to actually modify that base level terrain as well. And that's done simply by right-clicking on that feature. And it's one of our advanced feature creation options under the right-click menu. And we can flatten that into the terrain. And so this becomes actually a piece of that base terrain model. And when we do that, we can go back into our, if we just turn off our raster layer on top there, this actually becomes a piece of that pin grid that we have underneath, showing the area. If we go back into our 3D mode there, you'll see that that now is actually represented as a piece of that base level terrain. So that's going to be, again, very commonly used for things like tower construction projects. We can use things like road networks to calculate some of the more complicated things, such as trenching out, if we're going to be trenching out digging operations, say, along a pipeline, or if we're going to be working on something like a road network where we need to actually dig out the roadbed and use that those dugout trenches to actually modify our base terrain model that our analyses are put on. So from starting off with those very basic tools of drawing our simple areas and lines and points on the map, we can sort of springboard off into some really rather advanced functionality, all right there with the Digitizer tool. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up for today's session. I'll take a look, and we'll take a look at some of the questions that have been coming in along the hour here. I understand some folks have been having a little bit of trouble hearing us during the hour. I apologize for any trouble you might have run into in hearing that. Hopefully that will come through a little better in the recorded version. We will have a recording of this posted on our website probably early next week. And it looks like a fair number of the questions have been answered. I think we've actually covered most of these questions as we've been going along. Okay, it actually looks like we've taken care of most of the questions as they've come in. A lot of them are pretty specific. Here's a fairly general question asking about the snap dot available in the snapping tool when your features are coming along. The snapping tool was actually modified a little bit. For those of you working with a version prior to version 13.1, you're not going to see that same behavior in there. That was added actually in the 13.1 release. We were working in around there. A couple of folks had some requests around that type of thing, and so that's been in 13.1 and 13.2. Anybody that has a 13.0 license and up, that is a free upgrade. So 13, anybody using 13, you can just go to our website and download 13.1 and 13.2 as well. Some folks asking about some of the data that we've been working with on screen here. The Aster data specifically that I have loaded in as my base terrain model. That data, the question simply was, can you get at that data yourself? And the answer to that is definitely yes. You'll find that under the download online data button. That's the one that looks like a globe up here on the toolbar. You'll also find that under the file menu as download online imagery, topo, and terrain maps. That's a great place to get some new data for yourself. You'll see there's a number of different types of data, everything from terrain to aerial photos. But that's a great place to get at data. You can get the Aster data there, the worldwide data set. You can also, specifically here within the U.S., there are a number of very high-resolution terrain sets, such as the U.S. National Elevation Data Set. And as well, again, base imagery types, such as there's a base world imagery type that has variable resolution all over the planet, as well as 1 meter resolution stuff here within the U.S. But there's a number of sources there that you can get into with the download online imagery tool. I think we've covered most of these questions. If there are any in here that I've missed or that we haven't answered throughout the hour, We will be following up with those after the fact via email, but I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Again, the recorded version of this will be posted up early next week on our website on the webinars page. And thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next month.